Good afternoon and welcome to a webinar organized by the Turkey program of the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy. My name is Ioannis Grigoriadis. I'm an associate professor at Bilkent University in Ankara and the head of the Turkey program at ELIAMEP. And today I have the honor and pleasure to host a webinar on Turkey's double elections. Turkey is having two elections on this Sunday, and we're going to discuss the domestic and international implications of these elections with three distinguished experts. We will first start with Nilgün Arısan Eral, who is the director at the Center for EU Studies at TEPAV. TEPAV is the Economic Policy Research Foundation of Turkey. Then we will give the floor to Professor Soli Özel, who is a senior lecturer at Kadir University and the leading columnist in Turkey. And then we'll give the floor to Wolfango Piccoli, who is a co-president at the political risk advisory called TENEO, which is based in London. All three of them are experts in Turkish politics, and they were kind enough to accept our invitation to discuss this afternoon what these elections mean and what a victory of the government coalition or the opposition coalition could mean for Turkish domestic foreign policy, as well as for Turkish economy. We will start with a short introductory commentary by the three speakers, and then we will have the opportunity for questions. Feel free to communicate your questions to the channels on social media that ELIAMEP has, and I will be very glad to convey these questions to the speakers towards the second half of our webinar. So I'll first give the floor to Nilgün. Nilgün, how will Turkey's domestic policy be affected by the results of the elections? Why everybody is saying that these elections are crucial for Turkish domestic political future?
Of course, let me thank you for inviting me. But let me start by saying that I'm not a political scientist. So my answers to your question will be like the answers of a layperson on the street. Well, it is a very critical election because we are living under autocracy, and this autocracy is taking the shape of a religious autocracy. We're becoming more and more religious, and Turkish Republic is under the danger of totally losing its secular nature. That's why we are all very concentrated on the outcome of these elections. If these elections would be won by the opposition, by the Nationalist Alliance, currently, I'm talking about first presidential elections. Currently, it seems so. If not in the first round, in the second round, it seems sure. If you look at the opinion polls, the Democratic will have our not perfect, but democracy back. And I think the democracy we had before was not perfect, but if the opposition wins the presidential elections, they will try to make it not a perfect one, but a near perfect one. They would concentrate first on domestic politics to stop the erosion of rule of law, to stop the backsliding in democracy, and provide fundamental freedoms, release the political prisoners, first of all, the philanthropist Osman Kavala, and then the co-president of HDP, now the Green leftist party, Demirtas. They already made it clear that they are going to abide the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. That means the immediate release of political prisoners. They have a lot to do as well. They have to change this unorthodox, this strange, this unique economic policy being pursued by the current administration, and also they have to change the nature of the judiciary to depoliticize the judiciary. It wouldn't be easy, but actually the strategies are there. Together with the EU, we have a judicial reform strategy that has never been implemented. I think they will make use of that strategy. Of course, they'll try to put an end to corruption as well. it will be difficult because it's almost entrenched into the current Turkish political system. The strategy is there as well. We have a perfect anti-corruption strategy prepared together with Sigma experts in the past, Sigma in OECD, but it has never been implemented. Of course, I mean, all these things are easy to say, but difficult to implement. But it seems that they have a good team to implement all these reforms. They are working with very experienced diplomats. They're not that old to come back to work with the administration again. They have a lot to do on the domestic front. Shall I say a few things about regarding my expertise on Turkey relations? They argue that they are going to reinstate the Turkey-EU relations, and they are going to reinitiate the Turkey's accession to the EU. But they are wise and experienced enough that not to hope to reinstate the accession process of Turkey immediately. First, I think they'll concentrate on to put an end to the erosion of mutual trust between the parties, and that can start with real cooperation on certain issues. Some of them are rather easier. Let me say cooperation on anti-terrorism, but some of them are very difficult. Let's say cooperation on migration, because they have different objectives in that sense. I'll come to that. Or also they are keen on updating the customs union process, updating the existing customs union, and liberalizing the visa regime between the parties. Well, regarding migration, actually, the opposition intends not to continue to the policy that makes Turkey a pool of all the migrants. They say they intend to send them back, but that would be voluntary. But if you look at the recent country report, Turkey report of the European Commission that was published, if I'm not wrong, in autumn 2022, there EU also refers to the funds to be transferred to Turkey, that these funds will be transferred for the dignified return of the migrants and for the border security. This coincides with the objectives of the opposition. Of course, we don't know what dignified return means, but the parties can come together and can determine the parameters for that. And border security is crucial for Turkey and for the EU as well. So I think with sincere and detailed negotiations, the parties can agree on that. I think visa liberalization, I heard the opposition leader, our presidential candidate Kılıçdaroğlu, claiming that visa liberalization for Turkey can be materialized in 3 months. It can be, provided that Turkey would fulfill the remaining conditions. The toughest condition for the existing administration is to change the Anti-Terrorism Act so that freedom of expression would be taken out of the definition of terrorism. That wouldn't be very difficult for the opposition if you look at the program. Of course, that visa liberalization should go through the decision-making mechanism of the EU, first Council of Ministers and then European Parliament. Regarding modernization of customs union, the first conditions laid by the EU for this process to start was Turkey going back to democracy, rule of law, and fundamental freedoms. But these conditions were changed in 2021. Now, trade irritants in the existing customs union should be alleviated, and Turkey should open its ports and airports to Cyprus Republic. The second part of the second condition can be difficult or can be very easy. It has nothing to do with Turkey recognizing Cyprus Republic or not. Our ports and airports were open until, if I'm not wrong, 1987. And in the past, Turkey said we are ready to open our ports and airports, provided that the direct trade will start with the Northern Cyprus. If I'm not wrong, in February 2022, Greek Cypriots submitted a non-paper on this issue. I mean, opening Famagos port to that international trade under EU supervision. This can be done. Current administration put pressure on the administration in Northern Cyprus not to take this non-paper into consideration. But if you look at the discourse of the opposition, they can start thinking about this possibility. So even customs union modernization can be on the table if cooperation on these areas, including other areas, can be materialized with mutual trust being rebuilt. I think then we can start talking about reinstating the accession negotiations. I hear some European colleagues stating that an accession should be totally forgotten. It is out of the picture. I don't think that. Our negotiations have not been officially suspended. And if you look at the decision of the EU leaders back in June 2018, they were de facto suspended because of the backsliding in democracy, fundamental freedoms, and rule of law in Turkey. If we started to move in these areas, I think we can open the accession negotiations if EU wants to stick with it, with its norms, or in my opinion, with universal norms. I think I should stop here. Then I can continue with the questions that will be directed to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nilgün, for these very important comments that introduce us both to the domestic political field and into the field of EU-Turkey relations. I'll now pass the floor to Soli, who is an expert on Turkish foreign policy. How will the victory of the opposition affect Turkish foreign policy? And how will the survival of the government, Erdogan's government, going to bring any new light into Turkish foreign policy? There was a very interesting tweet by Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu yesterday evening that is very much related to my question. So I would like to hear your opinion.
Okay. Well, first of all, again, I thank you as well for inviting me. And you know that every Turk is both an expert on economics and an expert on foreign policy, as well as football. You know, I'll try to say a few words about what Turkish foreign policy might look like if the government changes or if it doesn't change. But I really think if the government changes in particular, and based on what Nilgün has already said, I think the real challenge is not going to be for Turkish foreign policy. The real challenge is going to be for the foreign policy of Turkey's allies, because they have been extraordinarily lazy, uncreative, unimaginative, complacent, because they had a very good and maybe fair excuse that you know, beyond transactionalism, there was no point in dealing with the current government. It didn't keep its promises. It didn't honor Turkey's obligations in terms of international law and all of that. And I'm not really sure that should the opposition win and field actually very competent, experienced, seasoned team to repair Turkey's relations and actually to begin discussing all the outstanding issues and beyond, that the Europeans are actually ready to do that. And no amount of arrogance is going to actually cover this, in my judgment. So when you look at the joint program of the opposition, their 5-page foreign policy is basically foreign policy part section is actually full of platitudes. For me, the most interesting part of it is they said they are not going to repeat the mistakes of, or they're going to correct the following mistakes of the current government. And of course, of those mistakes, 3 of them were actually initiated by one of the participants in the opposition coalition, Mr. Davutoğlu. I don't know how he feels about that, but it's going to be very interesting for him to sign on to a lot of things, one of which, of course, is going to be the management of relations with Mr. Assad, who is now doing the rings around the stadium because he has now been readmitted to the Arab League. He is definitely the winner of the bloody civil war during which he killed 500,000 of its own citizens and basically made a third of the country refugees, either inside or outside the country. Repairing relations with the alliance, I think, is going to be the first task. I do expect, and by the way, I expect this even from the current government if they stay in place, that the veto blocking Sweden's accession to NATO is going to be lifted. The Swedes have also taken a step, they've changed their law on terrorism, and I suppose this will give cover to anyone that wants to move on with NATO expansion before the Vilnius summit in July. Next, of course, is relations with the United States. Already, I think it is an important sign that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu chose the former Turkish ambassador in Washington, Namık Tan, as the lead figure in one of the Istanbul electoral districts, which means he will be a member of parliament, and should the opposition jointly with the other coalition actually control the commissions, and I suppose Namık Tan will be heading the Commission on Foreign Policy, and I expect his first trip to actually be to the United States to discuss outstanding issues. The two most important of which, of course, are American help to PKK's extension in Syria, PYD-YPG, and the other one, of course, the presence of S-400s Turkey bought from Russia and could still not deploy, which actually got Turkey kicked out of the F-35 program and blocks it from buying the F-35s that it already paid for. And that, of course, brings me to your question. Your audience may not be familiar with the tweet that Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu sent in Cyrillic alphabet, no less, warning the Russians not to do a lot of dirty tricks that he accused them of doing to influence Turkey's elections. I mean, I was really busy since this morning, and I haven't really looked at social media. I don't know what the hell happened. I don't know if the Russians responded and what kind of response they've given. Wolfango, you can compliment this, because I just got out of a class, and this is unprecedented, I guess, for the leader of an opposition party, which has a good chance now to be the next president of Turkey in a presidential executive system, to warn the Russians, if you really want our friendship, and we really would like to be friends with you, we want to continue good relations with you, stop meddling in our elections. So since I don't know what the Russians have said, I cannot really tell you what the repercussions should be. Finally, if this current government stays in place, it will have very little, if any, credibility around the world. Its opening to the Middle Eastern countries was instigated from a position of very, very deep weakness. Therefore, it's not really getting everything that it wants. The money is not coming. The Egyptians are really playing very hard to get. And sooner or later, I think even relations with Israel, however much they may try not to say a word about what Israel is doing in occupied territories or in Gaza, is going to explode. And with the allies, there is really, as I said, total lack of trust. And I guess it will be, unless they come up with dramatic, positive, concrete changes, such as releasing Kavala or Demirtas, whose release is actually demanded by the European Court of Human Rights, whose verdicts are ought to be law in Turkey. Unless they do such drastic changes to convince people that they are going to be following on a different path, Turkey's foreign policy is going to be in dire straits. And Russia alone, I don't think will be able to cover all of Turkey's needs.
Thank you very much, Soli. I think the Russian spokesperson said that this is not true, obviously, and accused the person who informed Kılıçdaroğlu about this.
Okay.
So they're trying to keep it a low profile, obviously.
Yeah, it's a measured response. It looks like, it sounds like, from what you said.
So thank you so much once again. I'll now give the floor to Wolf, who's going to talk about Turkey's most important, hottest topic, which is Turkish economy. Many consider the Turkish economy to be the bellwether of these elections. Others consider it to be something like of a ticking bomb. So a problem that's going to be present in the very, very near future. So how would a government change affect developments? Well, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting. And going back to the Russia story, there is also a Reuters piece out this morning where Kılıçdaroğlu is quoted saying that he's got hard evidence about the Russian interference. So let's see whether he gets another reply from Moscow. As for the economy, well, there are lots of uncertainties in this election, but there is certainly a few certainties. So whoever is going to win is going to inherit a big financial mess. That is how it is right now. And he's going to inherit a financial mess in a very difficult international backdrop. If I take you back to 2002, when the AK Party won, after a major financial economic meltdown, the external environment was very supportive. Money was flowing, money was cheap. Well, that is not the reality now. So the external backdrop will not be as supportive as it was in the early 2000 year. As usual, in the case of Turkey, the main channel of transmission is a currency, the Turkish lira, even more in these days because the central bank is left with around $28 billion of reserves. In reality, the net reserves is minus $68 billion. Okay, so there isn't much in the kitty, if I can put it in that way, to try to sustain the lira. Now, what happens with election? Well, it's one of the few clear things as well. Very different kind of programs. If Erdogan wins, prevails, it's going to be more of the same. So this heterodox monetary policy anchored by all sorts of macroprudential measures, I call them tricks, to try to sustain the lira, meanwhile begging around the world for money from friends and others, like it's been the case for the last few months. We have seen this noise about Şimşek coming back or not. I don't think it will make much of a difference. I think the aura of Şimşek has been over for some time, and the people have seen what happens with Erdogan. He appoints a somewhat credible character, and he can get rid of him or her at will. So I don't think that will make a difference. As for the opposition, it's pretty much like Soli had said before. If you look at the program of the opposition, is reversing what Erdogan has done. Well, the problem with that is actually not an economic strategy, okay? So we are still waiting to see what is an economic strategy of the government here. They are talking about going back to orthodox monetary policy, which obviously everybody understands, like increasing the policy rates, which is now at 8.5% in an environment where inflation is sticky and is above 40%. Fine, that's all easy. Much more difficult is going to be dismantling what Erdogan has created. If you look at the swap of the central bank and you put on top of that the FX protected deposit, we are talking about $140 billion. That is 15% of GDP of Turkey. How to unwind these is going to be very complicated. It needs to be managed very, very carefully, especially in this kind of environment, because it might bite you. So when we talk about orthodox monetary policy, it's actually, that is the simplest part, but dismantling this is going to be tricky. And especially in this kind of environment where you are short of net reserves and where you are running a current account deficit for the last 12 months, the rolling one is around $55 billion, okay? And the other issue here will be, going back to the Russia point, what will be the attitude of the countries who have been supporting Erdogan with these swap deals? Will they ask for the money back? the Qataris, the Saudis, the Chinese, the Azeris, the Russians, and I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody, the South Koreans, excuse me. That will be an interesting area as well to monitor the connection between foreign policy and economic policy here. On the fiscal side, for me, one of the biggest dilemmas they're going to have to face very early is about the inflation, meaning, are we going to tell the truth or are we sticking with the Erdogan figures? We know that the current figures of the inflation are cooked. But if the problem is that if we do a revision of the inflation and we declare that, I don't know, maybe it is 70, 80%, I have no idea. That means hiking wages very significantly. And that means creating more inflation when you are trying to bring it down. It also means alienating a lot of businesses because suddenly their cost of labor will go up significantly as well. So in my view, that is going to be one of the very tricky, difficult policy choices to make in the early days, because if you do a revision, obviously you are showing to the people that you are trying to regain trust, you are showing to investors that you are cleaning the house, blah, 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 blah. But doing that, it could bite. The other problem on the fiscal side is that we don't know how is the Turkish fiscal, how big the hole is. We have no idea. We don't know about liabilities from the PPP schemes, the public-private partnership schemes that were used by Erdogan to build all sorts of infrastructure, from public hospital to bridges and nobody uses and so on. The last estimate I've seen, these liabilities could be another 150 billion. And then you need 7-8% of GDP to rebuild the areas hit by the earthquake. So the fiscal on one side, the opposition is, one part of the opposition at least, is talking about austerity, if you listen to Babajan, whereas the other side, more the CHP, but certainly even more the E party, the good party, is talking about more spending. By reality, there is not much money left. So there are lots of difficult choices ahead. And one final point for me, in my view, one of the most difficult challenges in the transition, and again, let's be very clear, I think this government is going to have 6 months to get things done. There is a local election next year in Turkey. You know better than I do how important local elections are, especially as soon as you won, potentially won parliamentary and presidential election. So the window is tiny, the lira is under pressure, and one key challenge for the new government is going to be the institutions. The institutions have been decimated by Erdogan. They've been hollowed out, they lost their independence, they are packed with partisan people, very often not with the skills, the qualities, the curricula for the job they are having. And fixing the Turkish institution will take a very long time. And these are critical institutions for investors, the judiciary, academia, the banking sector, the financial authorities, all the independent authorities from the central bank to the EPDK to Turkstat. Because in my view, what is very interesting that you never hear about, you don't hear very often about the damage done to Turkey institution by the current government, and fixing that will take a very, very long time. So all in all, I think it's going to be rocky. I think it's going to be crucial for the new government, if the opposition wins, to show cohesiveness, to talk with one single voice, which is going to be difficult because there are 6 political parties and there are lots of big egos involved here as well, which very often do not correspond to the amount of votes they're going to bring to the table that day, which makes the politics of it even kind of more difficult. Because otherwise regaining the trust of not so much of the investors, because it's very clear, foreign investors are not playing much of a role in Turkey these days. The exposure of foreign investors is at the lowest for the last 20 years, both in terms of bonds and on the stock market. Who's going to have a say are the Turks. They're going to have a say on Sunday in terms of vote, but they're going to have a big say on the economy as well. So if the government wants to regain the trust of the Turks and the Turkish savers, the window of opportunity is fairly tight. And let me stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very, very interesting.
May I say one thing? I mean, I did speak with somebody who's going to be one of the principals of the economic team should the opposition win. And rather than talking about more expenditures, I think they're talking about a more even distribution of income that will be predicated more on tax policies than just interest and currency. Secondly, it looks like, and I'm without denying that there are too many, well, there are basically 3 or 4 actors that count on the economic theme, that I think the management of the economy will be given to a single person. And the clash of egos and all sorts of other conflicts will, at least they will try to attenuate them, and then not to make it a big issue, because they also realize that if they cannot at least put the economy back on the path of being fixed, not only is there going to be a problem nationally, but local elections will also be in trouble. But in municipalities, especially in big municipalities such as Istanbul, there are also resources for which you may actually not need national government. So that's the incumbents will have a lot of advantage, I would think.
Well, thank you very much. And to follow up to what you said, they think that all these recent promises by Kılıçdaroğlu will fit within that framework, right? Because Kılıçdaroğlu has come out with a lot of sort of promises on a number of
I think there's been a real race here between the two sides who's offering more. I mean, it's even if you look at the Kılıçdaroğlu, the first 100 days plan, which was a real plan, but anyway, there is lots of spending there. And also what has been fascinating is to hear about all this money coming from abroad. Yes, it's true. There are lots of investors looking at Turkey very closely in these days because the whole emerging market story is not great, and Turkey is perceived as a potential opportunity, is a big economy, blah, 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 blah. But one thing is very clear. To attract that money, you need to move very quickly, to the point that, for example, clients are asking me now, if Kılıçdaroğlu wins, when does it take office? And in the reality, there is a tentative calendar here, but we know there isn't a real calendar, okay? So we are starting from there. There are some clients expecting action from Monday morning, which is not going to happen, as you can imagine. So the pressure, I think, is basically substantial on that front.
Thank you. Soli, would you like to comment before we move on?
I mean, first of all, look, Wolfango implicitly raises the question that everybody raises, and that is, well, will he give up power if he loses? That's
but
why.
Even just about the dates, Soli. If we look at the dates, let's assume Erdogan, concedes, okay? The president cannot take the oath until the YCK, the Supreme Electoral Board, publishes the date in the official gazette, right? That is supposed to be in the 19th of May, okay? Well, but if there are recounts, if there are legal appeals, for whatever reason, it could be, an MP in Sinjan asking for a recount, whatever, this could be delayed, okay? And then 3 days later, so we have a calendar, but it's tentative, okay? If we go to the second round, if we have to go to a second round, it gets even more interesting because second round on 28th of May, the YCK has indicated that they will publish the results on the 1st of June. Will Kılıçdaroğlu take the oath if he wins on the 1st of June because Parliament is already convened, or is going to have to wait until the next Monday like it is usually the practice, the 5th of June? We don't know. And we are to the point where financial investors are asking, give me the day, okay? And right now, we are not really in the position to give the day, not to mention if Erdogan doesn't concede, blah, 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 which I think is a low risk in my view. But sorry, I interrupted you.
No, fine. You just basically said, I mean, of course, the appeals, if there is a second round, will have been taken care of, I suppose, by the end of the second round. So they will not be an impediment. And then there is the change of guards that will take a few days. Yes, it's not going to happen on the 1st of June, I suppose. In that sense, we do not know the calendar. I misunderstood you. Sorry.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. Let's move now to the Q&A part of our webinar. We have a question for Nilgün. You mentioned migration as a key issue in EU-Turkey relations. And the question is, what are the prospects of a new agreement or of a reconfiguration of the relationship? Because there is an agreement in place that has attracted a lot of criticism. But the question is, can there be a better agreement, and how can developments in Turkey affect this?
The incumbent administration has been demanding a new agreement for quite some time, but EU has been refraining to do so because sometimes it is being referred to as dirty agreement. The agreement of 18th of March 2016 was a package deal. Turkey has to do this and that, I mean, in short, keeping the refugees, and EU conditionally committed itself to negotiate the modernization of the customs union, revitalize the accession negotiations, but these were both depending on conditions to be fulfilled by Turkey, and visa liberalization. EU hasn't been intending to have a package deal as such, and EU has put aside a certain amount of funds to be allocated to Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan in the region. Turkey, if I'm not wrong, was about to get 2.5 billion euros to integrate the existing Syrians in Turkey. A new deal wouldn't be a wide package deal as was in the past, but it would be a deal as such. The existing Syrians who settled down in Turkey, who settled their businesses, whose kids were going to the school, may stay in Turkey, and EU might fund their further integration into Turkish economy. And on the other side, Turkey might demand to put together a policy for the dignified return of the Syrians who couldn't be integrated into Turkish economy. So there can be a new deal, but it wouldn't be, its spectrum won't be as wide as in the past, and it would be based on pure migration. Things like modernization of customs union, revitalization of the accession negotiations wouldn't be there, and EU might prefer such a deal as well. The opposition has already declared that they want to have a new deal with the EU.
Thank you very much. A question for Soli regarding Turkey's position in the war in Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and what a new government could bring into this. So can we expect a radical shift on Turkey's side? We cannot hear you, sorry. You're muted.
The tone of the opposition has changed a little bit lately. Initially, Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu sent a message to the Russians basically saying, we wish to continue having good relations with you. We protest like the current government. We do not recognize the annexation of Crimea. We do not actually accept your reasoning for waging this war and not the special operation. But of course, we will continue to have cordial relations with you. Recently, a few days ago, I think Mr. Kılıçdaroğlu suggested that Turkey, because it was a Western country, it might join the sanctions regime. It wasn't a very clear text. I suspect that it probably means the financial sanctions rather than all the other sanctions, which everybody is actually competing to break, to violate, including Russia, plenty of European companies. Again, as I said, it is the way when I've read the text, if it was the entire text, I did not get a clear sense of what it meant. And I just presumed that they meant financial sanctions, which is, by the way, the sanctions package that the Americans, or the American Treasury in particular, most cares about. And today or yesterday, in his TV speech, the former ambassador in Washington, Mr. Tan, whose name I mentioned earlier, also suggested that the policy would change a little bit, and rather than this kind of neutral policy, Turkey would take a position which would also reiterate its membership in the Western alliance. I suspect this is a function of a different view on the part of the opposition about what the future of European security is going to be like, what position NATO is going to have in this new configuration, and in that sense, actually place Turkey squarely in the making of that security architecture, in the making of that security structure, rather than be a bystander pretending to be out as well as being in. But it has not yet been fully articulated, but this is what I expect them to actually to do, or to approach the issue as such.
Thank you very much, Soli. One question for Wolf that refers to the potential role of the IMF in managing Turkey's economic crisis. Of course, this is a very, very sensitive political issue in Turkey. So nobody wants to talk about openly about the possibility of bringing Turkey to the IMF, but how likely is it, in your opinion?
Well, the gentleman who has projected himself in the Western media as a next Turkey economy minister, Bilkent, has been very clear, no to the IMF. Kılıçdaroğlu has been equally clear, even in meetings where I was involved, no to the IMF. The IMF obviously comes with lots of toxic kind of baggage. I think there is a chance to do without the IMF. And this, when I say about to do with the IMF, it's not necessarily about the money, which is always important. And obviously that money will not flow unless we have also a significant improvement in terms of Turkey-US ties. But I think they will try to do without that. I think they might be able to do without that if they move quickly, decisively, and with a united front. Otherwise, they might have to think about that. I think what the IMF expertise will certainly be useful anyway, leaving aside the money. And also the IMF still gives to foreign investors a sense of visibility of about things, in the sense that, as I was mentioning before, we don't know what is the situation in Turkey, especially on the fiscal side. We have no idea. The budget of Turkey has never been audited, for example. And just to mention one, we don't really know much at all about the sovereign wealth fund that was created by Erdogan. We don't know about the abilities of the PP schemes. And I can go on and on. So where I will see as for foreign investor useful as a role will be the IMF coming in and say, okay, we open the book, we agree with the new administration, this is the situation. And we, so provided this sense of let's say, certainty. But yes, so far the message from the opposition is very, very clear, no to the IMF. Again, we have heard it before, and lots of countries have been forced to review the situation. But they have a chance, in my view, to do without. But they need to move very quickly and very decisively. If they start being gradualist, because at the end of the day, some of these measures, the problem they have, the expectation now they've been set very high, that an improvement will kick in from the 15th of May. The reality, there will be no improvement. The improvement will come eventually 6 months down the line. But in the short term, there's going to be quite a bit of pain here. And the challenge will be to try to extend the safety net to help those who will be most affected by this transition. That will be the real challenge, in my view.
Thank you very much. And I would agree with the point you made that it's a very, very broad and maybe disparate coalition of parties with different opinions. And usually it will take a lot of good leadership for Kılıçdaroğlu, if he gets elected, to bring all these different voices together and deliver these decisive messages to the international investors.
And especially the other point we have not discussed. The question also is not only to manage the coalition, as you say, it's diverse, blah, blah, but Will they have a parliamentary majority or not, by the way? Because we have not discussed this. We are so focused on the presidential, like the market is. In my view, actually, we need to pay attention to that, because if we have a scenario where the parliament is hung, nobody controls a majority, or where there is a majority controlled by the other side, regardless of who wins the presidency, it's going to get very interesting. Because we've never been there. It's completely uncharted waters. If you look at the Constitution in terms of guidance, good luck with that, because it's been so poorly amended so many times that it's basically a worthless piece of paper. So that is the other scenario we need to consider here, where suddenly we are in a reality where the parliamentary arithmetic makes things more difficult than we might have thought.
May I say something?
Of course.
Very much.
Yes.
According to the polls, as a single party, AKP seems to be the only party that would have the major of the votes in the parliament, major of the seats in the parliament. But as alliances, it seems that Labour and Freedom Alliance and National Coalition will have the majority in the parliament. But if the presidency stays in the National Alliance, if Kılıçdaroğlu becomes the president, as we all expect him to be, people argue that Erdogan would like to go back to parliamentary regime to use the power of its party in the parliament. It was just discussed yesterday, so I just wanted to share this interesting thing with you.
No, it is entering uncharted territory in many respects.
No, but the caveats Wolf has come up with are, of course, well taken. On the other hand, especially on economic policy, and especially if the opposition's economics team, which promised to actually look for the interests of those that are going to be crushed by the stabilization program, if they can keep that promise, if they can actually act on it, I don't see on economic policy too many divergences between the two current opposition blocks. And I expect them to actually cooperate in parliament if indeed you need parliamentary intervention, because we do have a very sultanist system and the presidency has an inordinate amount of power. And at least immediately, you may not need the cooperation of the parliament for economic policy. The most divergence probably will come on the Kurdish issue between the two opposition blocs, but that will probably wait for some time, except for the release of prisoners, I suspect. But on economic policy, I believe they can actually hit the ground running, or at least that's what their promise is.
Thank you very much. We have another question on Greek-Turkish relations and how they may be influenced by a victory of the opposition. Many Greek media focus on many nationalistic statements by members of the opposition alliance. So they are arguing that there's not going to be any change on the positive. But in the last few months, we've witnessed a sort of detente, kind of a thawing of the ice that prevailed in Greek-Turkish relations following the earthquake and the response of the Greek public opinion and the Greek government to provide aid and show solidarity to Turkey. So what is the situation, Nilgün? And Soli, if you want to respond to
it. First of all, I would like to state that if Erdogan stays in power, I don't think the current détente would be sustainable. It would depend on domestic crisis or a statement coming from Greek politicians that would push Erdogan back to his original narrative, threatening narrative. Opposition made it clear its basic principles of foreign policy, and that would be reflected on Turkey's policy vis-à-vis Greece as well. It would be based on international law. The threatening this poisonous narrative will be pushed aside. Dialogue and it will be based on the new policy will be based on diplomacy and dialogue. And if the current rapprochement or if the current détente continues with the opposition in power, things again even improve further. Dendias very recently proposed to have energy cooperation in the region. And who knows, maybe Greece can convince the other members of the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum to have Turkey in. That would make a great change in the cooperation and in the area, in the Eastern Mediterranean region. I think that maybe things will improve, maybe not immediately, slowly, but that would be a sound improvement. But if Erdogan stays in power, this current détente wouldn't be permanent. That's what I think. But I would like to say a few words. People in Turkey blame Greece for supporting the continuation of the Erdogan regime, because with Erdogan in power, that means Turkish foreign policy will be very unpredictable and Turkey will move away from West further. Of course, Greece has been benefiting from this. I mean, more investments in Greece, I mean, defense investments as well. And we know United States have opened bases in Greece. So people blame Greece for supporting the continuation of Erdogan regime for its own benefit. I hope this is not true.
Thank you very much, Nilgün. Soli, would you like to comment? Do you see any major?
I yield to her, since whatever I would have to say, I will have learned from her.
Okay. We have another question on Turkey's foreign policy in Africa and the Middle East, which was one of the key priorities of the AK Party over the last decade. And so the question is, will a new government, will Kılıçdaroğlu continue on this line, or will he shrink the scope of Turkish foreign policy into the more traditional regions that Turkey used to be active before AK Party?
I would suspect that the new government will have two tasks. One would be the restoration of relations with traditional allies. Second, to reprofessionalize Turkish diplomacy. And third, to actually be predictable. And I see no reason why, except for adventurous things, the policy towards Africa should change. Mind you, the United States and Europeans, the first maybe more strategically, the latter more economically, look at Turkey's relations in Africa with, I think, some admiration, and they'd like to take advantage of Turkey's established links to many countries in Africa, both economically and strategically. In the Middle East, well, the West, or certainly Europe doesn't much count anyway, but the United States is, whether it accepts it or not, in kind of a retreat. The Middle Eastern Arab countries are taking care of their own matters themselves. Saudi Arabia makes a deal with Iran, reestablishes contact with Iran diplomatically. They accept Syria into the fold. The Saudis are now much more active in Iraq. Obviously, that is part of their dealings with Iran. Maybe they will come back to Lebanon. So this is going to be mainly a region where things are going to be settled between the Iranians and the Arabs. And Turkey, I suspect, because it has not, in my judgment, played its hand intelligently in the course of the last 12 years, will have to take a back seat. That was, I guess, one of the reasons why the security axis between Turkey and Israel was thought to be important and reestablished even under this government. The question of Israel is going to be there, especially if the current government continues and continues with the policies that it is pursuing. And no matter how differently the next government might approach Israel, that might constitute some problem. But I think you will see much less Turkish footprint in Middle Eastern politics than you've been accustomed to in the past 15 years.
Thank you very much. Question for Wolf. You alluded to the inaccuracy of statistical data in Turkey. So the question is, how dangerous can this be to trigger a crisis? I suspect a person asking things of the Greek case, whereby a revelation about inaccurate data kind of triggered the Greek economic crisis. Is it likely that we will face something like this in Turkey too?
No, because the market has been suspecting that the numbers have been cooked for quite some time. The main cooking, most of the cooking, at least that we know of, is mainly about the inflation. It's not about the budget deficit. Actually, being somewhat disciplined on the fiscal side is something that the Erdogan government has tended to do most of the time, with the exception of electoral cycles. So I don't think there will be a trigger for a crisis. So I would be surprised if suddenly there is an announcement by the new government, if there is a new government, that the budget deficit is, the 15% that Greece, we discover, eventually kind of reached. The cooking is mainly about inflation. And then there is an area where we don't know. I mean, we don't really know the situation within the state-owned banks. When the BBDK, the authority supervising the banks, suggests that NPLs in Turkey are 4%, that is laughable. I mean, it's no, I don't even think the people working there believe in that kind of figure. Whether then it is 7, 8, or 12%, as some people in Istanbul told me, that is unclear, because the reality is we don't really know what's going on within Halkbank. We don't know what is going on with the Ziraat Bankası. So there is, leaving aside the state, direct state infrastructure, there's also the state-owned entities where there is quite a bit of, let's say, lack of clarity, opaqueness.
Thank you very much. Since we're coming to the end of our webinar, we have one last question maybe that everybody can reply, which refers to the earthquake. We haven't talked about this huge and dramatic event that killed so many thousands of people and affected the lives of millions in Turkey. So this event has had repercussions, domestic, international, and economic. How has the government responded to this, and what is the challenge for the new government? And how can this affect Turkish politics on the domestic, foreign, and economic front? So let's start with Wolf, and then we can go in reverse order.
I mean, leaving aside the fiscal burden, because it's going to cost anything between 8 to 12% of GDP, depending to whom you listen, I think it potentially is a big opportunity for the new government. The current one didn't get it right. They mishandled it for a variety of reasons. So it's potentially an opportunity for the new government to show there is change, and especially if they are able to show one big story, that the money spent, there is a transparency about the money spent, that the contracts are given away according to the law, according to how tenders will be properly done, and not is the usual kind of groups winning them. So potentially it's an opportunity, but obviously it will be very, very costly.
Thank you. Soli?
One of the strange things about the impact of the earthquake is that, according to the polls, it didn't change people's political preferences. For someone like me, this is quite unbelievable, but this is what every single damn poll has actually shown. Are people pulling our leg, or are they really serious? I have no idea. We'll only discover that Sunday night. But I think the impact of the earthquake has been much more consequential in circles that are probably more educated and could switch towards AKP electorally. But even more importantly, probably within the Turkish state apparatus, there must have been people who are extremely unhappy with the picture of a totally hollowed out institutional structure of the Turkish state. You cannot run a country like that in the 21st century, especially one that faces as many challenges as Turkey, not in terms of economic management, not in terms of public order. Therefore, I suspect the most important shift as a result of the earthquake has been from within the state apparatus and how people view the current presidential system, which is in terms of governance, a total disaster.
Thank you very much, Soli. And Nilgün?
In one sentence, actually, I would repeat Soli in that sense. The earthquake and the response or the non-response of the current government in Turkey showed us how the institutional governance in Turkey has been weakened or evaporated totally. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much. This brings us to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank you very much for your participation. Nilgün, Arısan, Eral, Soli, Özel, and Piccoli, thank you very much for your valuable contribution and your ideas. And we look forward to discussing again the results of
the aftermath.
Yes, the aftermath.
And thanks to all who've been watching us and listening to us. Thanks to you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you.
And keep your fingers crossed.
Yes.